皆さんこんばんは。そしてこんにちは。おはようございます。では六本木アートナイトスピンオフのプロジェクトを始めていきたいと思います。昨日は第1部で今日は第2部ということでお話をしていきたいと思います。今日はアジア太平洋編です。国際芸術祭の新しい形はあるのかということでお話をさせていただきたいと思います。今日は3名の素晴らしい登壇者をお招きしております。キム・ソンジュンさん、広州ビエンナーレ財団理事長でいらっしゃいます。ルーベン・キーハン、第10回現代美術アジアパシフィックトリエンナーレ企画チームでいらっしゃいます。シュビギ・ラオさん、第5回コチムジリスビエンナーレのキュレーターでいらっしゃいます。片岡真美と申します。六本木アートナイト実行委員長、そしてまた森美術館の館長を務めております。今日は私が MC を務めさせていただきます。始める前に少しだけお話をさせてください。まず録音は禁止させていただきたいと思います。何かご質問がある場合には YouTube のチャットを使ってください。コメント、それから質問、セッション中でも結構です。ぜひいただきたいと思います。そしてこのディスカッションの最後の方で皆さんの質問に答えていきたいと思います。今日のお話なんですけれども、あとアーカイブでもまた配信を予定しております。今日はライブストリーミング、そして後にアーカイブで配信をしていきます。で、始める前にこの六本木アートナイトについて簡単にご紹介をさせてください。かなり異なるフォーマットということで、この3名の方がやってらっしゃることとは少し形が違います。次お願いします。こちらのセッションですが、もちろん六本木アートナイトの一部となっております。これは昨年の5月に予定されておりました。2009年に創設をされまして毎年行っていたんですけれども、2011年だけは開催を控えました。2020年この国際ビエンナーレというのも実際には延期あるいはキャンセルされたものもあるかと思います。そして2021年に結構多くのものが開催を予定されております。同時にこの国際芸術祭、ビエンナーレトリエンナーレもう模索をしてきました。どういうふうにやればいいのか、どういうふうに開催すればいいのか、アーティストがいない中でどうやって、展示会を行えばいいのか、そしてビエンナーレをどうマネージしていけばいいのかということを模索してきたと思います。我々にとって昨年は非常に重要な時期だと思います。一体我々の観客は誰なのか、そしてそもそもなぜ私たちはこういった展示会を開催するのか、そしてどうやってそれぞれのビエンナーレをこの先どういうモデルで続けていくのかという問いです。今日の登壇者3名の方ですけれども、今週ビエンナーレも昨年から延期をしております。しかしインストレーションが終わりまして3月31日今年ですけれども、再開を予定しております。シュビキラオさんは今年11月ですね、コチムジリスビエンナーレを開催予定です。そしてルーベン・キーハンさんは、EPT を12月に予定されていらっしゃいます。すべて今年予定されているということです。六本木アートナイトですが、さっきお話をさせていただきましたかなり変わったモデルとなっております。2009年に創設をされております。パリのニュイ・ブランシュというものをモデルにしておりまして、実はこの日の出から日の入りまでということで、3月28日私たちも3月28日の日没から29日日曜日の日の出にかけてオールナイトのイベントとして開催を始めました。このアートコミュニティなんですけれども、六本木ヒルズ、それから森美術館が2003年に開業しまして、そして2007年に東京ミッドタウン が開業しました。そしてそこにサントリー美術館、それから21デザインサイトも開業しております。それから、国立新美術館が同じ年に開業しております。これまでは結構多くの美術館、それからギャラリーが上野にあったんですね。東京の北側にあるわけですけれども、2007年以降は六本木が新しい言ってみればアート、それから文化の中心地となってきております。そして2019年にまで、初回から2019年まで南條文雄氏が森美術館館長として実行委員長を務められました。私が森美術館の館長を務めまして、私がそれ以降実行委員長を務めております。私もなぜこれを開催するのか、そして誰のために開催するのかということを尋問してきました。そしてまた持続的なモデルはどういうふうにすれば実現できるのかということを問い続けてきました。今日の3名の登壇者の方たちとは少し違った形ではありますけれども、基本的な共通の疑問、質問というのはあると思います。2009年、東京都が最初始めたんですけれども、今はいわゆる共同のプロジェクトとして東京都、それからアートカウンセル東京、これは歴史文化の東京都財団、そしてまた港区、六本木が所在しているところなんですけれども、六本木アートナイトの実行委員会というのも、このナショナルアートセンターと、それからサントリー美術館、そしてまた東京ミッドタウン、そして21デザインサイト、森美術館、森ビル、そして六本木商店街振興組合が構成をしております。アートとカルチャーなんですけれども、ある意味コミュニティなんです。どういうふうにこのコミュニティの中の人々をエンブレイスしていくのか、受け入れていくのか、そしてまた招待していくのかということを常に考えております。ということで、六本木アートナイトのご紹介でした。ではここからまず最初、ソンジュン・キムさんにご登壇をいただきたいと思います。広州ビエンナーレ財団理事長でいらっしゃいますキム・ソンジュンさんですが、実は長きにわたったの友人です。非常に素晴らしいキュレーターでもいらっしゃいます。最も直近ではこの広州ビエンナーレ財団に加えまして、アーティストディレクターということでリアル DMZ プロジェクトを2012年より務めていらっしゃいます。いろいろな課題、特に韓国の非武装地帯をめぐる問題を研究していらっしゃいます。そしてそれ以外にも、第51回ベネチアビエンナーレの韓国館のコミッショナーを務めていらっしゃいます。それからプラットフォームソウルの芸術監督も務めていらっしゃいました。メディアシティソウルの芸術監督も務めていらっしゃいます。2010年です。
We were also sharing this experience of a ninth Gwangju Biennale roundtable as a co-artistic director in 2012 with 4 other women curators from Asia. So without further ado, let's invite Sunjun and thank you. It's yours.
Yeah. Thank you, Mommy. It is great to speak on this occasion to let you know about how the process of Gwangju Biennale. So I'm going to read my text and then showing some of the images from I prepared for this presentation. So since the beginning of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has introduced us to new normal. We all feel that it's time to put our heads together to contemplate how the new norms are affecting international events such as Biennale and what direction or vision post-pandemic Biennale would be good to take. For my part, in today's talk, I will focus on the Gwangju Biennale and how we prepare during the pandemic. As you may know, the 13th Gwangju Biennale, which was initially scheduled to open last September, was postponed 2 times all preparation were carried out in accordance with the first postponement schedule, February 25th. And now the installation is almost ready. We are waiting for the forthcoming opening on March 31st. The 13th Gwangju Biennale consists of 4 parts. The main exhibition, the GB Commission, a special exhibition commemorating the May 18th Gwangju democratization movement, and the Pavilion Project. The main exhibition has been conducted by artist directors Daphne Ayas and Natasha Jimbard, while the other 3 programs are undertaken by Gwangju Biennale Foundation. The Gwangju Biennale Foundation is an in-house project, gave us more room to focus on local vision of the Biennale Foundation. The main exhibition directed by Daphne Ayas and Natasha Jimbard is titled Mind Rising, Spiritual Turning, and exploring the spectrum of organic intelligence by challenging the conventional division imposed upon corporeal, technological, and spiritual intelligence, and by investigating diverse practices such as cosmology, healing technology, and matriarchal systems. After their appointment in May 2019 and before the pandemic started in early 2020, the artist director were able to make research trips to Korea with the artists. This is our press preview on February 23rd. And during the photo is, and during the trip, they organized a workshop and proposed topics of forums and talk programs. We are planning to have a regular and continuous research and workshop programs, but since the COVID-19 crisis started, the South Korean government made a 14-day quarantine mandatory for all travelers entering the country. The curator team travel and on-site research was restricted. So we moved our preparation and conversation to online. The forum, which was initially planned to take place in different locations in Korea, was moved to online as well as because it became difficult for the artists to come to Korea to produce new works on site. The coordinators who are in Korea became very helpful, supporting with the research and new productions. Despite the unforeseen pandemic, the directors made every effort to organize and realize a dynamic and extensive program. In addition to creating an exhibition that will be mounted in several venues in Gwangju, they launched a series of public programs titled Live Organ, which included commission performances and organized talks and discussions, which are well documented on the exhibition website. You can see the 13th GwangjuBiennale.org is a website you can visit, and you can see all the new commissions and things like that. Especially the forum Rising to the Surface, Practicing Solidarity, invite artists, activists, and scholars to discuss grassroots struggles around the world. The artist director also produced online journal Minds Rising, aiming for it to serve as a window through which to show the participating artists and curatorial teams' research process, featuring essays and interviews by artists and invited writers and thinkers. The journal comprised an interdisciplinary platform of thoughts and ideas. Furthermore, a feminism leader, Stronger Than Born, has been published. Biennale preparation is usually a battle against the pressure to create a large-scale exhibition within a period or less than 2 years. We had to postpone the 13th Gwangju Biennale opening 7 months because of COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, but it gave us time to strengthen our internal organization and our local focus. The Gwangju Biennale was founded in 1995 as a memorial to the Gwangju's May 18 democratization movement of 1980. While the Gwangju Biennale has sought different possibility in considering exhibition themes and designs, the city's history of civil resistance has always inspired the participating artists and curators. And the so-called May 18th spirit has been a core theme of the Gwangju Biennale that distinguishes it from many other international biennale. To revitalize and expand the unique character of the Gwangju Biennale, already in 2018, Gwangju Biennale Foundation launched the two new projects named Pavilion Project and Gwangju Biennale Commission. Given that the general nature of a biennale are often temporary fixture within a calendar of global art scene, our intention for these two projects were sustainability. Though this program, we would like to experiment with the sustainable model for the biennale. GB Commission invite the selected artists to produce site-specific works in Gwangju inspired by the city's history or particular site. This is abandoned former military hospital. In 2018, Mike Nelson, Apichapong, Wirakunsal, and Kader Atia each created a new work at the former Armed Forces Hospital. This is Mike Nelson's work using the mirrors from the hospital and Apichapong's installation and Kader Atia. For example, Kader Atia, whose work explore the various kinds of wounds and trauma by using the concept of repair, created an interview-based video addressing attempt to overcome the trauma from the democratic struggle in Asia and Gwangju. This work played an important role in clarifying the vision and goal of the Gwangju Commission. The GB Commission seeks to repair the trauma left in the city by bringing light to the history site or revitalizing unused space in the city. Many places related with the Gwangju democratizing movement are preserved as a historical site and so inaccessible. And by using Gwangju's historical site as an exhibition space, the Gwangju Biennale Commission offers a biennale visitors and participate from around the world opportunities to visit Gwangju's historical site. This is the one way to show the artist's role and artist's power to inspire us. This is Kader, and this is Shiota Chiharu's work in the hospital in a former small cathedral room. And Ho Chun-yang made the animation, and this is Kim Sung-han's work. And this year, artists based in Korea, such as Libul Minuk Lim, Bae Yong-han, will unveil new installation at the former Armed Forces Gwangju Hospital. They will include a brand new site-specific production as well as artists' well-known installation work, contextualized and re-staged for the specific site. Along with the work from the GB Commission, furthermore, the exhibition commemorated May 18, called Between the Seen and the Spoken, will focus on the work by Gwangju-based artists. The Pavilion Project aimed to foster Gwangju's local art institutions' interaction with the international institution. Unlike the Venice Biennale National Pavilion format, it arranged a collaboration between a local institution and an overseas institution to create an exhibition in Gwangju, which opened in conjunction with the Biennale main exhibition. While the Pavilion Project operates independent from the main program, it offers a different kind of curating from it. And though this collaboration process, many of Gwangju's alternative space and private museum can learn how international institution works and use the learned knowledge and skill to develop themselves. Though this program, the Gwangju Biennale Foundation supports local institutions to improve and form cooperation models. It also supports the Biennale's international network to cooperate with Gwangju's local art scene. This pandemic caused many challenges and difficulties to prepare for this year's Biennale, but the crisis and the delay also gave a productive time to strengthen our preparation process and to focus on Gwangju Biennale Foundation's founding mission, which is related to the local history. However, when it comes to the exhibition, direct experience is always best. And as a curator, I have many concerns because it has become very difficult to create the exhibition and to visit sites. The 13th Gwangju Biennale is opening with a safety protocol. Temperature checking at the entrance is mandatory. We are adding an online reservation system, and we will also limit the number of visitors in accordance with the size of the venue. The question that concern me these days as I prepare for the 2020 Biennale are, what kind of goal or mission post-pandemic Biennale should have, and in particular, what kind of Biennale will be valuable or appropriated in the future. Looking forward to a more hopeful future, I conclude my presentation here. I would appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunjun. So I'd like to invite Shubhiji Rao, curator of the 5th Kochi Biennale, a Kochi Muzilis Biennale. She's a Singaporean artist writer, and she has been having an interest, the number of interests, including libraries, archival systems, histories and lies, literature and violence, ecologies, and natural history. And she has been participated in numerous exhibitions, which I do not have a time to list all of that, but you can look at the website to look at her the profile. So please join me with welcoming Shubhiji. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mami, and thank you to Moriarty Museum and the whole team for inviting me to do this. So I'm just going to start with just a brief introduction to the Kochi Muziris Biennale for those who don't know about its sort of like the way it operates and so on. So it's the Kochi Muziris Biennale. This is now the 5th edition that I'm curating, which has been postponed to the 1st of November. But it started as an artist-led initiative, and it's always curated by an artist. So in that sense, it has its own particular set of challenges, but also its own particular sort of forms and formats that are that I believe are unique to the Biennale. So the first thing is because it's artist-led and a lot of production happens on site, because we have a lot of new works commissioned. It also means that artists frequently get the opportunity to work closely with local forms of production and to sort of engage more with local communities, whether it's the weaving community and so on. So we've had a lot of very interesting projects develop in the past with this fruitful engagement. And a lot of artists feel that this isn't about showing a sort of a work at a Biennale only, but about a way of sort of furthering the artistic process, the way in which they consider site, because there are certain very sort of strong challenges with working also with some of our venues. So it actually takes place mostly on the island of Fort Kochi, which is on the Malabar, the west coast of India. And it's actually quite an ancient site, and it was known as Muziris, and this port used to trade with Mesopotamia going all the way back centuries. So it has this sort of, it's very porous and open to multiple cultures and ways of thinking, but also because it was colonized by 3 different European powers. So it's very, very multi-ethnic. It's very polyglot in that respect. And a lot of this is reflected in the work. So I looked at all of this, and also based on my prior experience as being an artist showing there who had made a work in situ at Kochi, I knew those challenges, but also knew how exhilarating it can be as an artist to be flexible in the way you usually work. Now, as it turned out that happened to be a bonus because I did not know it at the time, but the pandemic really changed the way we had to work. So before I get to that, which is the second half of my brief presentation, I'd like to just briefly show the sites. Almost all the properties are actually either colonial era or heritage properties. They run the gamut from warehouses to colonial bungalows. This is a primary site, which is called Aspinwall House. It overlooks the water. And it's, again, as you can imagine, a site that lends for a lot of different forms of intervention. It's a challenging site to work with because we have to lease it every 2 years, in this case now 3 years. And it gets, because it's a tropical part of the world, it gets quite overgrown and dilapidated in the interim. So there's a fair amount of work we need to do to get it sort of, up and running. At the same time, it's important to note that we have almost no white cube space. There is only one, and I'll come to it in a bit. So the conventional ways of working and thinking about exhibition making change here. And this is, of course, the frontage, the way, to enter into Aspinwall. It's a very large site, as a matter of fact, with multiple blocks and bungalows. And this is the other primary site that we have. This is called Pepper House. This is actually a heritage site as well. And we also have studios here. And a number of our artists do come here stay in residence and produce their work. So this has been in the past a very sort of fruitful way in which artists can sort of deal with the particular challenges of some of our venues. Now, I've said the word challenges a number of times, but I also must clarify that these are quite delicious challenges because, as an artist, they mean that they provoke new ways of looking at your work. One of the hallmarks of Kochi also is the demographics of our audience. There's a very large local component, and local isn't only Kochi or Kerala, the state, but also South Asia in general. At any given time during the Biennale's duration, you'll find that there's a lot of people coming in. There's no sort of lean period, as so to speak, in terms of viewership. Now, this is again important because we have to have works that can survive kind of the tropical climate for 3 months, and in the case of the 5th edition of the Biennale, 4 months, because we've extended it by a month. And also works that can be sort of that work within that time frame well. So Pepper House is a particularly interesting one. It also is a waterfront property. So we've had works in the past that sort of deal with this liminal space again. Climate change has affected Kochi, so we've seen a lot of degradation and collapse of the shoreline. That is something as well that artists have been looking at, and what that means for a historic site like Fort Kochi. This is the interior of Pepper House. As you can see, it's quite a beautiful space, not a white cube, but also a space that's remarkably remarkable in the way its natural materials can be again something to navigate. You can see this here from the last edition of the Biennale with Harry Dono's work, which is one of the more popular works in the last edition. And again, this is the classic local architecture there with the timbered roofs and so on. So the site is, and we generally, because it's a heritage building, we're not allowed to do a lot of we're not allowed to amend anything really. We can't do stuff on the walls and so on. We can't sort of change the flooring or damage in any way the structure. But these aren't necessarily restrictions. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are used to working with certain parameters that we cannot cross or cannot change. So there's already a kind of inventiveness with the way exhibition making happens. This is actually probably our only truly white cube space, so to speak. It's completely climate controlled. It's another site also that we lease. It's Darbar Hall, and it's actually on the mainland. So it's a short boat ride away. It's here. This is where you often find a lot of the works that are fragile or require very strict climate control. Having said that, we do of course make our own sort of capsule sort of sites or micro sites within the other venues. Now, this means that a number of works that we had considered, okay, we'll carve out smaller spaces and they'll be climate controlled, air conditioned, and all of this now is no longer possible because of COVID restrictions. As you can imagine, we cannot have groups of people coming into a very small space that is not ventilated beyond just air conditioning. So now we're looking more closely at what it means to have climate controlled microspaces within larger sort of openly ventilated, more porous places with multiple entries and exits. So since we cannot amend our sites and there's very little construction we can do beyond a certain point, these challenges actually become kind of fruitful sort of conversations and cross conversations between not only me and the artists and the foundation, Biennale Foundation, but also amongst some artists themselves who've been navigating ways in which the works can flow in a different way. So it's actually been it's been quite an exercise in sort of rethinking how these sites have traditionally operated over the last 10 years of the Kochi Museums Biennale. Now, I just also wanted to mention that I was extremely lucky because I was at the last leg of my curatorial research and travel. I happened to actually be in Australia. Ruben, that's when we caught up. I actually flew back out of Australia to Singapore just in time before the lockdowns began to take effect. So I was lucky enough to A, finish most of my curatorial research and travel, and B, not get stuck somewhere else overseas. This meant that the main curatorial framework, which I'd already developed, by the way, during the process of a year's worth of travel, was already in place. So I'd written my curatorial note. I think it came out not long after. And the note was actually written a while ago. It was written in 2019, as a matter of fact. And it just so happened that certain things that I was already thinking about, because I'd been traveling through the global South, in particular, some of my conversations in Latin America led me to think more deeply about what it means as a Biennale to be a resource-intensive and exploitative form of event. I mean, how could we build in flexibility and adaptability for projects that were not so resource-heavy anymore? And this was important also because the Kochi Museums Biennale is essentially a labor of love. And it's one that depends very heavily on support from its patrons and the state government and so on. And so it's a not-for-profit foundation, which means that we always are mindful about what goes where. And this was very important here. And in my curatorial note, one of the things I felt as I traveled more and more was that, and this is a conviction I had as an artist already, this idea that there is less that separates us, but more overlap. And I think one of the things that I was looking at was the flexibility of practice and the prominent ideas that were being discussed throughout the global South, and how those could exist in a place like Kochi without being flattened by the spectacle of a Biennale. So I was already thinking about changes in practice, changes in the way exhibitions are made. And one of the things I was looking at, again, was collisions between these works. So while I was doing site allocation, that's around the time actually lockdowns went into effect. We still hadn't yet discussed postponement, though. This was the first list of artists that was released. And as you can see from the list as well, they are fairly illustrative of what I meant by Global South thinking and sort of certain conversations that are predominant amongst a lot of these artists are conversations that are relevant like almost anywhere, if you think about it. Now, what was important here to me as I was sort of doing the framework for this Biennale was also to see how certain practices that are particularly well known in their region could travel and work well in a place like Kochi, right? So it's for me, it was not just about the simple importation and showcasing of existing sort of recognizable practices, but also those that perhaps would benefit from the kind of cultural hothouse that Kochi is. And around this time, I think it was becoming apparent around middle of 2020 that we're going to have to discuss postponement. Now, originally, the Kochi Biennale is always held on the 12th of December. And we did not come to the idea of postponement very like just very quickly. And the reason for that is because actually Kerala was managing it very well originally. But then I think also we have to acknowledge that we have a very large international audience that comes in. We have a large, as I mentioned already, local and a larger South Asian audience. And one of my particular points of focus again is Southeast Asia and South Asia and East Asia connections throughout sort of, the last half century. And I think it became important for us to say we're not going to be able to have that unless we postpone. One of the things the Kochi Muziris Biennale is also known for, because it's so artist driven, that it's really actually a community of artists that get together at the time of the opening. And it's a completely different atmosphere. As I could say that as an artist, I'm not just saying it as its curator. And we honestly were thinking, we're not going to have that again. And that's important because some of the conversations that are valuable to an artist are not necessarily those where at an opening, so you get to meet curators and so on, but it's really conversations between artists who perhaps haven't had the chance yet to interact with each other. And there's always an emphasis for the Kochi Muziris Biennale to bring as many artists in as possible. That's one of the things we really try to do. And I was very excited when I started doing this at the prospect of bringing in artists from throughout the global South for this event. And so when we discussed postponement, this was something that was important to me. A lot of the artist projects have had to be renegotiated. We had to rework a lot of them. And every single one of the artists, without exception, has proved to, they've been, forget amenable about the changes. A lot of them have actually welcomed the fact that they can rethink their work and rethink production, rethink audience, rethink the possibility, though we are not wholly in favor of it, of a larger online presence. We are still juggling these things. I think that it was important that we don't sort of sideline works that perhaps don't perform as well online as those that do. And though there will be an online component, we want the physical exhibition to have its primacy and immediacy that it's always had. And that's, again, a very important point of focus for us. And as an artist, I think it is very unfair to certain media that don't translate well online. Let's also be honest, there is digital fatigue. The idea of navigating a Biennale fully online is, I think, in my opinion, at best a secondary choice. In an ideal world, it would be better to have people come in. Having said that, even pre-COVID, not everyone has the means to travel to Biennale, so having an online presence is also important. How has Kerala been coping? In a sense, it's actually done pretty well. In fact, the lockdowns were strategic. They were very few, the numbers were very low. Social distancing exercises were followed through extremely well. This was, of course, we're talking mid-2020. And as you can see from these numbers, Kerala was actually doing extremely well. Unfortunately, over time, and this, of course, is the woman to whom we owe that. She's the health minister, as a matter of fact, former teacher. She, in late 2019, already when she first heard about COVID, started sending out information to local communities about the possibility of a pandemic. And that's because under her watch, Kerala already grappled with the Nipah virus and also successfully managed that. So Kerala was doing a great job, which is why we hadn't yet postponed. But then, unfortunately, it really, a lot of people came back in, diaspora came back in, infections went out of control. Now, of course, things again are looking better with vaccinations. India, again, the numbers are looking better. So we are hoping that, things will improve. Now, it's important for us because it's not only about the eventual exhibition. Kochi is built, as I said, it's very much a community, sort of inter-community effort. So we have to be very careful and mindful also about local people on site, the people who actually build the Biennale. And we don't really want, a situation where it sort of spirals out of control. So we're very closely following government directives and protocols. And this is, of course, something we're keeping in mind. The 14-day quarantine thing, we are trying to handle by having artists do residencies, and the quarantine sort of gets absorbed into that time. So it's a way to ensure that production on site that needs to be supervised by the artists can still happen. So, we hope that that we can manage the situation as much as we can, but we also know that this is a fraught thing, and all said and done, the importance of the Biennale for Kerala and for Kochi is critical. It's a really important event there for communities, but at the same time, we also know that nothing is more important than health and safety of the people, not just the visitors, but also the local people who are involved. So we hope to see you all on the 1st of November. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope there are questions after this.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I cannot imagine experiencing Kochi Biennale without going to Kochi. It's such a special place to be. So I would like to welcome third speaker, Ruben Kihan, curatorial team. He's a curator of contemporary Asian art at Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery Modern Art, where this 10th Asia-Pacific Triennale of Contemporary Art happens. And he had already been a curator for APT 2012, 15, and 18 editions. And he had been also a curator of the number of group exhibitions which collaborated with the institutions in Asia, including Japan, such as Time of Others with the Museum of Contemporary Art Tokyo, National Museum of Art Osaka, and Singapore Art Museum. And also I had a pleasure of working with him with Gabriel Ritter in 2013 for Roppongi Crossing Out of Doubt. So please welcome Ruben to hear how he's preparing for APT.
Thank you, Mami. And thank you very much for inviting me. I'd like to acknowledge, first off, the traditional owners of the land that I live and work on here in Brisbane, the Turrbal and Yagara people. This is land that was never ceded, and we pay respects to elders past, present, and future. I'm just going to share a screen now to talk about our project, the Asia Pacific Triennale or Triennial of Contemporary Art. I guess I'd like to start by saying that Australia, and in particular Queensland, the state that I'm in, has been extremely lucky in the course of the pandemic. There's a strong public health system, and strict national and interstate border controls were instituted very quickly. That's seen coronavirus outbreaks extinguished relatively quickly. So here, 0 cases is regarded as the normal. And if a single infection enters the community, there are snap lockdowns that manage that very efficiently. And this has meant that we were able to return to some semblance of normality, of normal life, in a reasonably short period of time. So our gallery was able to reopen after only a few months of emergency closure in around the middle of last year. Now, we're still working, of course, on this 10th edition of the Asia Pacific Triennial. When the pandemic hit, of course, we considered the possibility of delaying the exhibition, but as it turned out, conditions meant that we haven't had to. And we're lucky. That wasn't the case for the excellent Biennale of Sydney that was curated by Brooke Andrew, which opened in March 2020 and then had to be suspended very, very quickly for much of its duration. It did open towards the end of that period. Other arts organizations here came close to bankruptcy or closed permanently, and a large number of arts workers were placed in dire financial circumstances. And in Melbourne, unfortunately, there was quite a large outbreak from one of the quarantine hotels that ended up becoming one of the longest and strictest lockdowns in the world. So again, I say we've been extremely lucky. We've also been lucky because of the curatorial model that the APT operates under. And that's one where, unlike the majority of international art festivals, where you have a single artistic director who changes each time, we actually work with a dedicated department of curators who work within the host institution. So we're fostering and developing research, expertise, and relationships with the artists and communities we work with over a long term, and it's not limited to a single exhibition. So one way of thinking about APT as it's evolved over its 10 editions is that each edition is really a kind of a staging point or a report in an ongoing process of research and engagement. So we were fortunate again, we were lucky to have traveled extensively in the course of 2019 and in the early months of 2020. And then once the lockdown was in place and leaving the country was not an option, and it's still not an option, we still can't leave Australia without special permission from the government, we were able to draw on the existing relationships that we had with artists and art professionals throughout the region to compose the remainder of the exhibition component of APT 10. So from this perspective, because of this model and because we'd been lucky enough to have all this travel, it's been possible for us to produce an exhibition, and we're working towards delivering it on time. I guess it's also important to acknowledge the ways in which the pandemic has actually impacted on the exhibition. And most pointedly, you can see some images here from the opening weekend of the last APT 9. We're working with the understanding that the vast majority of the artists won't be present for the installation of their works and for the opening weekend. The strict border controls that we have in place, which have largely prevented the virus from circulating in the community, are also going to prevent international artists from entering for the purposes of APT, at least in its early stages, possibly later. But beyond the obvious challenges involved in installing remotely, I think we've sort of spoken about that. This means that one of the most exciting and productive moments of the triennial won't happen as before. And in that, I mean bringing together a diverse group of artists from across the region and seeing them share knowledge, experience, and solidarities. Shibiki spoke a little bit about the Global South. I think the range of the geography of the Asia Pacific that APT covers is, largely by definition the Global South. So that opportunity for those very intense, intimate dialogues is unfortunately going to be lost. We're also going to lose that intense schedule of live performance, artist talks, and panel discussions, and all of the encounters that occur in between. That will be strongly felt, not just for us who worked on the previous editions of the project, but for our audiences, our immediate audiences. And it's also limited our capacity to develop site-specific works. So works such as murals that would require the hand of the artist, live performance, residency-based projects. These things can't happen this time. We've had to find alternatives. We've even had to look at how we think about sound in the space, because we can't use headphones that are shared between different members of the audiences. Globally, the pandemic has also affected artists more directly. So, away from the privileged context that we're living and working in here. So we've seen disruptions to supply chains that have impacted the availability of materials for artists. Really strict lockdowns have, and necessary ones, have prevented artists from accessing their studios. Travel restrictions have meant that certain research-based projects couldn't be pursued. So in almost the case of almost every artist in the exhibition, we had to develop a plan B, and in some cases, plan C and D as well. Although I do acknowledge Shibigi's comment about artists welcoming, rethinking the way that they work. There was something about the fluidity of working through this period that was actually quite interesting. We also need to consider the question of audience on a number of levels. Attendance to APT, that's physical attendance, has grown exponentially over the years, and it's by far our gallery's most popular exhibition. And at the end of 2021 and in early 2022, unfortunately, it remains unlikely that our substantial international audience will be able to attend the exhibition, at least physically. There's also the issue of the readiness of local audiences and even our interstate audiences to visit a potentially crowded site like an art gallery. So even though we have quite a lot of freedom in Queensland, people do remain vigilant. And I think these are conditions we've all had to observe, and I think they're going to affect social behaviours for some time to come, certainly for people who might be a little more at risk. But on the other hand, I think social distancing has produced a number of exciting possibilities for engaging with remote audiences. Sorry to put this slide up. I know that you're all quite familiar with this sort of experience, but I tell you, it is a really kind of a productive one. This is our interlocutor group. It's a group of advisors to the APT who include artists, curators, researchers from across the region. I put this up because this is one of the few places you can actually bring artists and art workers from between Fiji to Kazakhstan together in the same place and actually have a dialogue. And I think that's just been a kind of a really exciting aspect of what we're doing. The other thing we found is that online participation in public events has been enormous, actually much larger than our on-site attendances. And the galleries actually put serious resourcing into developing digital programs and also online access to our collections and archives. It's really given us the impetus to develop that in some depth. And on an anecdotal level, I could say that I've found the relationship with artists and also my broader networks of friends, peers and colleagues around the world to have been enhanced by the greater use of social media, messaging, video conferencing programs. In some cases, I've had far greater contact with this quite dispersed community over the past 12 months than I normally would have in the production of an exhibition, where the process would be having these intimate conversations during very, very intense and quite tiring periods of research travel. And I think this experience is definitely going to transform the way that we work in future. Finally, and I think really productively, there's been a turn towards the local, to the capacity of the institution to engage with the diverse communities in our place, and to do it in greater depth than we had before. So initiatives that we already had underway to refine the way that the gallery engages with different audiences have taken on far greater relevance as we look in a new way at the space that we all share together. And this means reconsidering our modes of address, ensuring we create safe experiences for viewers from all backgrounds and abilities. I'll end on the corporate logo. I'll say that again, we're lucky. The advantages of our geographical location and our institutional stability have allowed us to work confidently with challenges posed by the present moment toward delivering the 10th edition of this APT series. At the same time, new possibilities have been opened up by this sudden change in our relationships with each other. And they offer the potential to work more sustainably, more inclusively, toward a greater depth of engagement with our local community and the artistic community of the Asia Pacific all at once. We're in a place of privilege, and it's time to share this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to see all these very different models, but actually all of the international art festivals and biennales have very different models. So I would go straight to the discussion because we lost some time for intermission. I think all of you mentioned about the audience and who is your audience. I just wanted to ask you, what is the demographics of your Biennales or Triennales audience before pandemic? How much comes from the local, and who you could define who you define the local are, but how much comes from interstate, how much comes from international? Anyone?
Yeah,
Sonjun,
we have correct figures, but we have most of the audience from local, and maybe 10% from other cities.
10%?
10 to 20, and then international audience. I think it's not so big. I mean, we have lots of international audience, but our number for the audience is 300,000, so it's a lot. And then, so I think most are from Korea, but international audience are coming, but it's very limited because of the location. Gwangju is not in Seoul, and so that's what I think. But we don't have exact numbers.
Shubhiji?
Thank you. I did briefly touch on demographics earlier. Sorry if you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we had about 600,000 visitors for the last edition of Kochi, and that's generally what the numbers are like for a 3-month-long Biennale. Spreading it over 4 months, we had anticipated pre-COVID similar numbers, but also this was to include a lot of school groups that can't come because of the March exams. So we're still keeping it at 4 months, which makes sense because you can spread out your audience numbers. But I don't have the exact figures, anywhere near exact figures, since I'm merely a one-time curator here, for the breakup between different demographics. But I think we do have a very large local Kerala audience, of course, and as I mentioned already, South Asia. This is South Asia's largest arts festival. It's not just the Kochi Museums Biennale, as in the the International Biennale, but also there's a Students Biennale, which now this time has been staggered. But there's also a very large performing arts program that also occurs. There are multiple programs that occur simultaneously. So the audience that we get is fairly large in terms of international terms as well. I would imagine it's based on my experience of visiting, which is honestly very anecdotal, and I apologize for that. I would say about, I think, 30% approximately. I could be completely wrong here, though.
Ruben?
Yeah, it's a mixed audience for us. There's obviously a strong local audience, but we're lucky enough to be in quite a popular tourist precinct within the city, very close to the CBD, and with a lot of cultural institutions. So we do get a lot of people from interstate. We get a lot of people from other parts of our state, bearing in mind that Queensland, if it was a country, would be the 15th largest country in the world in terms of area. It's very big. And there's a good international audience. And I suppose that international audience is composed of, two key groups. One is the art-specific audience who travel for this exhibition. The other is the very substantial general international tourist audience. But I think when it comes to the local, I think this is where the bigger question of demographics needs to be asked as far as the exhibition goes. This is an exhibition that represents parts of the world already represented in communities throughout Brisbane. And a really important factor of that is ensuring that people feel safe and welcome to actually come to the spaces and to see the work. So there's an important emphasis, I think, on diversity, not just at the level of artistic content, but in terms of who feels that the gallery belongs to them.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to discuss a little bit more about inclusivity later on, but I wanted to ask Sonjun, as one of the longest history of biennales in Asia now since 1995. And the Guangzhou is a local city and it doesn't have a contemporary art museum. And how do you see the development of audience by having biennales every 2 years for 25 years?
I think, we have 1 million in the first time, over 1 million audience in 1995. But ever since, it's getting down and down, lower and lower audience, now 300,000. So, but in the beginning, it was like a big event, like Olympic or Expo. So people thought they should see this Biennale. But according to these editions, people saw contemporary art too serious, too difficult to understand. And so yeah, more like civilians, they used to come, but now they stopped to come. So what I try to do now is how attract these normal people. Art people. So we are thinking about to develop the learning process with the local programs a lot, and also workshops, and also since my appointment in 2017, we have made a program for local artists. So we are going to visit artist studio with the public, and also we are streaming online and also we published a small catalog with this local artists. So since 2000, so we have quite big number of database for local artists, and also these artists are included in this May 18 show in coming edition, and also we are trying to connect with the local artists and also this international artists to get to know each other and how to get close. We have in 2018 we have many school programs. So artists visit the school and do workshop, and so more like to that I want to them to understand contemporary art and to close with the contemporary art. That's what I try to do.
Yeah, it's a constant challenge, isn't it? I remember when we worked together for 2012, we also invited some local artists and did some studio visit. But I think it was big meaning for those local artists.
And also, in that time, we started a residency at the market, and so Junyang became making artist newspaper and also staying closely with artists, and so this relationship actually worked for in 2018 when Junyang came back to Gwangju Biennale and made a new made with the artists. So this connection might be good to the local audience, and also this Pavilion Project I started since 2018. This local institution, the Gwangju Biennale has a great network, but local institution didn't know how to work with the international institution or international alternative space. So I hope this opportunity, through this opportunity, they can learn how to work with the international institution and do the project together. So that's also another point I try to do.
Oh, I also wanted to ask you, Sonjon, the GB Commission, is it a permanent display or only for the duration of the Biennale?
Some are permanent, and we are starting collecting the work because we might build a new building. I mean, this is our, because the current building has no temperature control or humidity control. So if we loan the work, it became big problem. So we hope, because the building was done it took only 6 months to make a big building.
Initial Biennale hall.
Yeah, in 1995. So hopefully we can make a new building, and so we are also working on archive and library. So we can open up our archive and library in the new building. So we are preparing like a APT. We making kind of model to making collection and archive and library for the public in Gwangju. Yeah, because there is not really contemporary art museum. There is other institution, but it's more focused different. So and also there are no institution with international institution or international artists. So our role can be making this using this network to facilitate this network to work with the local institution and local artists.
Thank you. I think APT is also another long-term dedicated triennale for the region, and particularly in Australia and in New Zealand, it's very important. They're making it. Playing a very important role to introduce Asian and Pacific artists, and the other institutions of course shows the artists from the region, but not as much as the APT. And then also, as Sonjo mentioned, it's very important model to look at collection, how much you commission earlier in an earlier time, and then you're growing collection from the region. Maybe you can comment a little bit on that part, but also I wanted to ask you how you think audience building after so many years, particularly for the understanding of Asia and the Pacific, the contemporary art from Asia and the Pacific.
I mean, I think those questions are probably related in the sense that museum collections have an extraordinary role in shaping the understanding of a certain local public of what art is, what it can be. And certainly the development of that collection through the APT has been quite extraordinary in terms of fostering an audience here in Brisbane. One of the things that we've seen, one of the things I guess it's in keeping with developments that have happened worldwide, certainly in Western countries, is that over the last decade or 15 years, contemporary art has become popular, and in a way that is was quite sudden, because when I started working in museums, a bit over 20 years ago, the accepted knowledge was that the contemporary art was elitist, it was opaque, it was something that people didn't understand, and people have found a way to embrace things they may not understand. First off, on a number of levels, they may be a sensual level in terms of this kind of experience that they have. It may be in actually sort of being challenged. It may be in the diversity of practices that they see, which is slightly different from more conventional, old-fashioned European-style museums. The specifically Asian and Pacific component of it, obviously, is the thing that interests me most. It's that when APT started in the early 1990s, the first edition was 1993, two things were happening. One was that Australia was starting to rethink its relationship to its very European, very kind of Anglo-centric history, where Great Britain was still seen as a sort of a major sort of cultural influence to this much more diverse society that had been emerging since the 1970s. And secondly, contemporary art in Asia was getting really interesting. So the developments that had sort of happened through the 1970s and 80s, and really significant social changes that were occurring in the region, meant that this was a period when artists from throughout the Asia Pacific were producing work with renewed confidence and vigor. And that really enlivened those early editions of the APT. It's really fortunate they did, because it sustained us through a number of shifts in governmental cultural policy and in thinking about the way that we relate to the region, so that we in turn can now be confident about the way that we relate to artists. Above the fray, I think, of what I would call a certain diplomatic noise in relationships between countries, to actually focus on artist to artist, person to person relations, as ultimately what we're doing is connecting artist work to our audiences through the event. When you kind of mentioned collecting, obviously the pandemic has made things a bit more difficult with the financial crisis that we saw in the middle of last year, but it's something that we're really committed to realizing for the current exhibition, and will certainly continue.
And how do you see your audience changing the understanding of art from Asia and the Pacific?
In the first instance, the audience has grown. From, I think, 60,000 people saw the first APT. I think around 800,000 saw the last one. But at the same time, the audience has also grown up with the exhibition. I grew up with the exhibition. I was 17 when I saw the first edition. It influenced me no end. I'm working on it now. But, I will have people who are now adults, people who have, children who came to see early exhibitions, with their school group, and they've grown up with it. And I think that's one of the importances of the local. And when it comes to collecting, exhibitions will change. Artists, the artists who feature in them will of course be different, but the audience often stays in place throughout the period of an entire life. So when you're making these exhibitions, something that somebody sees when they're young may well be something that they remember and that that stays with them when they're much, much older. If you can maintain some consistency in terms of presenting something, having a structure like a triennial that forces your institution to look regularly at the same region again and again, then it means that you foster that greater understanding that becomes lifelong within the local audience.
Yeah, actually, when I did Sydney Biennale in 2018, I realized the people in that city since 1973, they had been exposed to quite radical contemporary art for 40-some years. And I saw amongst the audience, the senior couples and elderly people, a lot of them are coming. And I saw no kind of allergic to contemporary art, of the complexity of it. So that was quite interesting finding. And some of the audience said that, I have seen all the 20 Biennales. So it's a great school. But talking about the audience development, Shubigi, I think Kochi Mujeres Biennale is still relatively young compared to two others. But as you mentioned, it's artist-driven, and then also in a very particular place, very different from New Delhi or Mumbai, and just simply beautiful landscape, but lots of historical sites, and but no contemporary art museums, or probably no art fairs. So I think a Biennale started also with youth Biennales and also other sort of parallel events, and to reach out to the larger local audience. can you elaborate a little bit more how you are approaching to the local audience and how you see, probably you have seen from the beginning, and how you see those sort of acceptance by the audience has changed, or some growing new generations?
Thank you. Actually, I didn't see it from the beginning. I left India about 20 years ago, and I've hardly been back. My experience with Kochi is even newer than the Biennale itself. So, but I must say that the point you raised is really critical here about local engagement. It's this Biennale really exists because of local involvement at almost every step of, through the whole process. It's really not an institutional Biennale. Well, it's been 10 years, so it's probably growing to be an institution. And that of course comes with its own set of gains, but also drawbacks, as you can imagine. The flexibility of the Biennale, as I've mentioned, in terms of exhibition making, also you can see that happening at multiple stages. So the venues, for instance, since we don't actually have dedicated venues, the fact that they have to be released means renegotiating with local people. But also, I think whenever we talk about production, our entire production team is local. They come from Kochi, and they're the ones who also advise the artists about possibility of collaboration. So their knowledge is always more than even the curators, to be honest. So the teamwork that happens on the ground is critically important here. Most of the work, even when proposed from outside, has to find its interpretation. It can function in Kochi, in other words. So because it's a new Biennale, there isn't very much strict hierarchy here. So there is a lot of back and forth, I would say. I wouldn't say parity, because it's hard to say there's parity in Biennale, to be honest. But there's a very, very large local involvement. And I think it can't function without that. And if we're talking local involvement, we're not only talking about producing artists' works or things like that, or installation issues and so on. I'm talking also about the fact that the Biennale is a critically important aspect of Kochi's local economy as well, right? It's a major center for tourism, yes, but the cultural tourism that has occurred and continues to occur as a result of the Biennale is very closely tied also to Kochi's position now in India as being very important in the local art scene. You're absolutely right about the paucity of museums in Kerala. They are, to my knowledge, no dedicated museums of contemporary art in Kerala. So it's something that I think there have been conversations happening between the state government and the Kochi Museeris Biennale Foundation. These are things that I hope will happen, but there is no question that over the previous 4 editions, we've had repeat audiences, of course, very similar to what Sanjun has mentioned and also what Ruben has mentioned. Of course, that's also because I think it was very strategic to not have the Biennale in New Delhi or in any of them, or Mumbai, or as you mentioned, any of the metros. To have it in a place like Kochi is a very important decision. And I think it speaks also to the original idea or vision behind why this Biennale was started. I think that Kochi is very well suited for a Biennale, despite appearances and despite the fact that things can sometimes be hard to navigate. For instance, there's also a naval base in Kochi, which means that we can't get artists from Pakistan, for instance, to come in. The works can, but not the artists. So they are these particular issues as well. But we've always managed to navigate these things. Because Kochi is also so multi-ethnic and multi-religious, multicultural, there's already an openness, and I mentioned already, because of its history and as a byproduct of also being sort of receiving refugees and immigrants for centuries, also being the landing point for 3 major colonial powers. What has also happened then is Kochi is incredibly open to sort of new ways of making, thinking, and looking, whether it's art, literature, music, dance. So there's already this idea that interdisciplinary work is not a novel thing. It's not something that only is a contemporary concern. It's something that has major historical antecedents. And so this in a way, I think works very well. Everyone talks about how cosmopolitan Mumbai is, but it's also right now, I mean, I would argue quite parochial in many ways. And it's also because Delhi and Mumbai have their own entrenched art scenes. It can become nepotistic, if you know what I mean. Kochi dismantled all of that by having the Biennale in Kochi. It's in a sense, and especially from someone like me who's coming back after 20 years, I have no prior links to the art scene in India, which means that I can actually approach this with fresh eyes. And Kochi is the best place to have done this. If it was in New Delhi, for instance, there would be a massive emphasis on North Indian concerns. Kochi isn't parochial in that way. And I think that's very important because we're also discussing the Indian context here, situations that are particularly Indian, the North versus South, I think divide, if I can call it that. It's hard to find the correct word here. But they are a major, there's a lot of push and pull there. So in the sense, Kochi as I think has proven to be honestly one of the smartest choices. Also, I think the Biennale has, in a great way, worked very well with certain things that Kerala is now being known for. For instance, the largest number of startups is actually in Kerala, in Kochi area, not in Silicon Valley, which is interesting. It also means that there's a lot of conversation between artists and people who work in tech. So it's not just a sort of isolated contemporary art event. It listens and speaks very closely with multiple communities.
Very interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about the post-pandemic possible sustainable model of these biennales. And since I am preparing for Aichi Triennale 2022, and in the condition that I cannot make international travel, so I understand that all three of you, the research part has been already done. So you can just implement. There's something out of what you have researched already. But in the future, as Ruben mentioned a little bit, with these Zoom meetings from different parts of Asia and the Pacific, what do you think would continue? These some of the models that we started to apply after COVID, and what model would work better or more sustainable in terms of the research? And one of the parts, probably I wanted to ask Ruben to start, because the APT's model is accumulated the research resources within one institution. So I think that helps a lot to continue or adding more knowledges. While some of, as Ruben mentioned, as most of the biennales, the curators changes every time, so that it's always from the start of the beginning. But what do you think, Ruben?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think those two models can coexist. And that I think it's great to consolidate knowledge, but I also think that it's really wonderful to disperse it as well, to have it actually moving around. I suppose APT is from a time that's reasonably early in the trajectory of the development of international biennials, and so it maintains a lot of the aspects of the biennials that influenced it, in particular Fukuoka, Asian Art Show, which I think was a structure that was certainly at the front of people's minds when they were developing this model. For the future, I mean, there's a bigger question, right? I think before this pandemic, we were already asking this question of sustainability. Shubhigi mentioned that biennales are resource intensive and exploitative. That's certainly the sense that a lot of us had. The enormous carbon footprint of logistics is something that we were thinking about before 2020. I know that we were having discussions about this, Mummy, in 2019, and certainly with other people. So it's it's an interesting moment to actually reconsider what these models are. And I think maybe the coexistence of the two models I mentioned, the consolidated model, the cumulative model, and this much more kind of dispersed model, are something that can actually operate at the level of individual biennials and triennials themselves, individual art festivals, where you have part of the festival that's actually delivered to the audience. And let's face it, as both Sunjung and Shibigi have said, the direct experience of the exhibition is always primary. And I feel that particularly intensely in terms of the Asia Pacific Triennial, because in reconciling the very diverse cultures that we actually bring together, the common thread is the expression of accumulated knowledge through material practice. That's very, very important. But at the same time, there is this extraordinary new conception of audience that I think has opened up during the pandemic. And we started to notice in that running our own online programs, we weren't just getting local attendance. We were getting people from all over the world, because it was actually, through this platform, it was actually really, really broadly open. We're also getting people attending events and participating in events who live in the city but may not be able to physically attend the exhibition. That may be through a whole range of factors, including socioeconomic, the conditions of one's life that make it impossible to kind of leave the home, varying levels of physical abilities that we can actually allow for with this kind of programming. So it's a bit of a tension, I think, between the two kinds of experience that we want to foreground. And I think the future, if it's not a combination of these things, it will be a negotiation of them. And it will, I think, be a model that's more sustainable ecologically than that which we've been working with to date.
Thank you. Yeah, I think ecological sustainability issue is foregrounded by this pandemic experience, and thinking about the distance that the whole this museum community and Biennale community is moving the works around, and then also making artists and curators travel. And certainly that custom has been questioned. Sonjon, I think you also tried many different things during the pandemic, and you will also have to have next one quite soon.
Yeah.
So what part of the challenges that you experienced would continue for the next year and beyond?
Actually, with the 13th Gwangju Biennale postponement, so we have the foundation, Gwangju Biennale Foundation has last year, May 18, 40th year of May 18, democratized movement exhibition. So we are looking back our archive and finding the artist research base from our inventory, and then providing this material to the curator to use this material as an exhibition material. So Untitled Chapter made the exhibition with this material in Seoul and Gwangju, and Binna Choi also did the exhibition in Kowloon. And so we try to do making our previous Biennales material can be used, reused in a way. And so that is one way we try to do during the pandemic. And also this 13th Gwangju Biennale main exhibition, artist director wants to make many new productions. So 60% are new productions. So they the artists visit the site visit before the pandemic. So they have certain ideas. So our team or supported to make it happen. So like filming in outside and also collecting sound and many different things. So this also work for the way of this production. But I don't know. I mean, the research is a big question actually, and how to do this research without going and visiting. I think it's impossible in a way, and hopefully in the fall or coming year, we can travel to visit artists and also other exhibitions. I think the direct view or experience is very important for the exhibition. So I think there is no way. I mean, there is a way to do research online, but that is not enough, I think. Yeah, I'm old-fashioned, so.
I completely join your group. But I was actually thinking the earlier models of a Gwangju Biennale or even APT, that you had sort of regional curators.
Yeah, right.
And then they brought their experience and the knowledges and then put together. And probably at some point, maybe in 2000, the one single artistic director started to travel around and to make a whole picture. And I was thinking maybe we could go back to the earlier models of pulling those models or knowledges and experiences together. And it's actually something that I'm doing it for Aichi, some version of it.
Yeah, I think it's. I actually think that's a future direction of these kind of exhibitions, and for more than one reason. I think obviously there's the sustainability question, but also particularly when you're dealing with contexts that are radically different from the one that you live and work in, there's always the risk of imposing a particular aesthetic or ethical framework over fields of production. I think the practice of art history within curatorship perhaps has been a little lacking. I say that hesitantly, but with the shift towards spectacle in biennial exhibitions, there's become a very kind of outcome focused way of thinking about the way that we work with artists, and actually making these things more multivocal actually challenges some of the institutional assumptions that we make, particularly in a country like Australia, which is, a settler colonial society. At the same time, I find these multivocal exercises, these collaborative exercises, so much more fun, actually, so much more interesting. There's so much more to learn for the participants and not just the audience. And it's maybe that kind of that idea of the curator, the person who's supposed to be the authority, learning through what they're doing, that appeals to me.
Yeah, I think there is always, even before pandemic, there is an impossibility of one single curator or artistic director to go around the world within given time and budget. And to meet sufficient number of artists. So I was thinking one way was what APT is doing, like same group of curator does multiple times so that you can accumulate these knowledges. But how was your experience, Shubigi, your world tour of the research?
It's funny you say that. I feel like a carbon criminal for one thing. Well, actually, I really enjoyed this part of the conversation because it's something I thought about the moment I was planning the curatorial research. And it also coincidentally turned out that a number of my peers are also curating or co-curating biennials and triennials. It's just one of those strange coincidences. And so we just made an informal decision to share not itineraries so much as share the regions we were going to, the places we were going to, and to share with the consent of the artists, the portfolios or the experiences, studio experiences and conversations that we had. And that's what we did. For that reason, I did not need to travel in large parts of, so for instance, I concentrated more on West Africa rather than East Africa because two of my close friends had traveled extensively in East Africa. And so instead we shared information. So this was just an informal thing that we did because we all felt that it was really actually, first of all, as you said, Mami, very correctly, highly impractical for one person to do this grand tour. But also then I really, I know this framework of APTs of having regional curators also works very well. I think the Singapore Art Museum had done that for some of the Singapore Biennale editions, where they had regional curators who actually only concentrated on one particular area. And that serves quite well. I think when we talk about the pandemic, though, this becomes even more important than informal arrangements like the ones that I did, for instance, or participated in. I think it's important that we recognize that very often, even if we can travel, we don't have enough time in a particular place. And we have to rely on local support or local introductions or local institutions who are our in, so to speak. And that means that, again, we get a very specific set of introductions. That's if there's no prior sort of an existing network there. So I think it's important that we also should look at the way how multi-layered art communities are in a place as well. And I thought of this a lot, especially in South America. If you go only through the network that you already know or your foundation knows, then you only meet the same set of people who are already doing the Biennale circuit. So that can work if that's what you're looking at as a curator, that's fine. But I think if you want to look at, which is what I was trying to do, and a lot of us, I think, try to do, which is look at people who perhaps have been overlooked for, not for any, particular reason, but just it so happens that they haven't shown widely outside of their region. And they have something cogent to say at this moment, and it's cogent for that Biennale edition. Then I think it's important to also go past just the usual suspects, so to speak. So that's something that takes time, effort, energy, and you need a team that actually can do that level of research while you are constantly traveling and undergoing jet lag, really. So I think that the support structure that we're speaking about here is critical, even if you have a single curator or if you have a curatorial team. So you can do intense deep dive research in a place, but I think the database of information should also pass on to the next edition's curator or curatorial team. Like in Kochi, for instance, we don't have a dedicated curatorial team that has a kind of handover to the next edition. So in a sense, you're starting from scratch and you have to rely on the goodwill of existing networks to provide you access and information. And that, again, as I said, is perhaps not the ideal. I would really love, perhaps this is a bit idealistic, but I would actually love a more collaborative conversation between curatorial teams in any given year, who perhaps opening the same year, and sort of share information. I know that Natasha Jinwala, as a matter of fact, Sanjan, was very forthcoming in terms of when I was looking at artists from Sri Lanka, for instance. So she drew on her prior experience with Columbuscope to introduce people. I mean, there's just this sort of give and take that was interesting at the time that I think they were, Daphne and she were discussing their curatorial framework as well. Natasha was very open, sort of, was also talking, listening to people. I think this kind of conversation is great when it happens between curators. And also, I think because we can't rely only on looking at particular cities in the same region. That's another thing. We rely too often on what we know as tier 1 cities, for instance, and we don't often make our way to the second or the perhaps more burgeoning and not yet there, so to speak, places in a region.
Yeah, I think it's very important to diversify the cities, not only metropolitan bigger cities, but you have to go to regional cities in different countries. But I like the idea of archiving the research result that we only probably could actually invite 10% out of what you have researched. So to keep that materials and knowledge in that in institution would be a great idea. But maybe in the future, if we install those data to one AI robot, then he can curate one Biennales. But I'm looking at my iPhone that we have to close in 15 minutes. So to the audience, I would like to encourage you, if you have any comments or questions, that I can take them through YouTube comments. So you are welcome to join our conversation. Yeah, in terms of the install, Sonjun, you already did installation without much of the artists, and but curators were there, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, is there something that we can learn out of like Zoom installation or the installation without the presence or without becoming friends without drinking?
Yeah, I mean, our artist directors in Gwangju with 2 weeks quarantine, and they work really hard to install the works. And also, we have a great team, exhibition team members. They really work hard to realize the installation. So only 10 artists came from 69 artists. So, but 2 of them are performing artists, so they are not doing installation. So it was a difficult moment to do installing the work. And also some artists has only ideas, so they have to realize the whole installation. And also we have Daphne and Natasha hire a good technician from Europe, but he has a baby, so he couldn't come. And when we talk about the lighting, he cannot see the lighting in person. So there is many discussions, and finally Natasha came, and then she settled down the whole discussion. So yeah, it's challenging, but I think we can learn through this experience. So next edition might be better. Yes.
Yeah, I think absolutely the Zoom installation will become one of the options for our Biennales, and also probably museum practices. That it's very difficult still from our generation, like a dinosaur who could travel to different places. But also, I was talking with one of the artists who was participating in one of the Triennale in Japan, but didn't come. And I was asking about experience. And he said probably it depends on the engagement or conversations with the curator in prior to the installation. If you have enough conversation with the curators, then you feel that you're already part of it. But if you just simply learn the work and not much conversation about how to install and even the lighting level, then the artist feels detached from what he's just simply learning the work. So even through Zoom, I think, intense care and then also discussion is going to be probably more important than ever before, because I think once you meet, a lot of tiny details can be solved, but without being present in the space, then you have to confirm every details in prior to the installation. Ruben, what do you think? You are planning some of the installation is going to be without artist presence, right?
Yeah, I think we'll have maybe, because of the way that the borders operate, we have effectively a closed border. We have a position where even if you can actually negotiate for somebody to come, you're actually taking up a quarantine place from somebody who actually wants to come home, because there are still people who actually haven't been able to come back. Like it's been a year. So there's that ethical dimension as well. We have about maybe 10% of the artists in the show who are Australian or Australian based who will be able to attend. That's providing that the state borders stay open, that there's no outbreak elsewhere. So it's going to be a very different experience. And that means obviously a longer lead time in terms of discussing with artists about, you know, what the installation's going to look like. But, you know, this is the first time that we'll have done this on this scale. And it's going to be a learning process. I imagine there will be difficulties. I suppose what's interesting about this is that we're now a little way along the line in terms of artists' own experiences of doing this remotely. So when Yokohama was really the first major biennial of the pandemic period to actually open, I remember, being in touch with a number of the artists. Not even the curators could be present at that exhibition, and and they were finding it very, very difficult. But I do think people are adapting slowly to this experience. I think if for the future beyond this, I think that let's find a mediating position. So should borders open within the next year, and I really hope they do. I think for future exhibitions, maybe a residency model is more productive, where you actually have people come and commit to staying for a longer time. We could do that now because we have the technology to actually continue the conversations that we're having elsewhere. We don't need to be traveling around the world so much. We can still travel. Let's do it more slowly. Let's do it with a way of kind of finding out more about the place. The great thing about residencies, and a colleague reminded me of this the other day, is that when you place an artist within an institution, they actually have the opportunity to change the institution in some way as well. And that's an additional benefit. And that's particularly when we come to the question of inclusivity, there's a whole nother function of these large art festivals that we can find and explore.
Yeah, I totally agree that talking about rediscovering the community and then also engagement or commitment with the local community, which actually we spoke about a lot yesterday among Yokohama Triennale, Tokyo Biennale, and Saitama Triennale, that how can you make a longer commitment to the community. And some of the model like Tokyo Biennale that Masato Nakamura has been there for a long, long time. So he's almost like a mayor of the city, of the region. But something I also felt difficult as an artistic director for the Sydney Biennale to do something with the community was that I just did not have enough time to get acquainted by the community. And I felt so guilty not having in-depth conversation with the local people. And I of course invited some of the artists who could do some project with the local community, but it was great to have some artists who stayed longer, even after the opening, to continue something during the Biennale. Because normally all these artists comes from abroad, and then we have a great party, and then everyone leaves. So that's something to shift the focus during the exhibition, so that people come and go, but still have that longer commitment. So to do that, I think the idea of a residency is quite possible. I see some light there. I think we are finishing in 5 minutes, but at the moment I have one Very nice comment. Thank you for an interesting conversation. Hope to be able to visit the Biennale or festival soon. This is really true. And since we have a space and then also we have an opportunity to put together contemporary art from around the world, that we have to really think about the reason of being ourselves and why are we doing it and what for. And it's been just a great given time to think about it for last year. I'm just waiting for one last question. But I think what Sonjun said about the archive is also something really important. Yeah. And I think APT already have a quite well-organized archives too. And every time people comes and even new director comes, then they can revisit the histories of the Biennales. Okay, this is the question. How can we nurture future generation of curators to build professional network without physical, tangible experience of research? Any suggestions?
いい質問だね。It's a good question. Wow.
Sonjun?
Yeah.
Sonjun, what do you think?
It's difficult question. I mean, Shubiki, you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, funnily enough, I do. Thank you. I actually think that, I actually think that it's something. I'm going to speak now as an artist curator, someone who's not a professionally trained curator, which means that I, in a sense, am very much a noob, like a future curator would be starting out. I have to say that we can't downplay the importance of, as Ruben mentioned, some of the most fruitful conversations you can have now virtually. I think that artists are also getting used to the idea of virtual studio visits. Again, not ideal, but even a physical studio visit may not be ideal. There are times when the curator is simply exhausted because of the rigor of travel, curatorial travel. Sometimes it's a pain to actually locate a studio, and you walk in, you're a bit tired, you haven't had time to eat, and you can be a bit off. So sometimes it's okay to also accept that while the physical is the ideal, because we've been used to it, it is possible to even improve the virtual sort of forms of connection that we are developing, because what we have right now through Zoom is not the ideal. We're in the process, I think, globally of figuring out as artists, but also as curators, how to sort of have really meaningful conversations. And I mean, the best ways, of course, is always also to hang out with artists outside of the studio. I know that works really well, and to see them sort of, for everyone to really let their hair down, which isn't possible over Zoom yet. At the same time, I think if you're talking about future curators, we have to also look at the adaptability of artists. When we're talking about artists and curators getting more used to virtual conversations, there is also an ageist component to this. There are a number of artists who are a lot older, who perhaps are not very comfortable with using virtual means to communicate, and that's because that's something that's they've just come to recently. And I think we will see I think a de-emphasis on older practices because of this, unless they're already established practices. So if someone's been overlooked for say 30-40 years, it's going to be really hard to sort of learn more about the entire sort of breadth of their practice virtually. So I do anticipate a problem. I don't see an easy solution. I also think that we have to look at the virtual as something that's in development. That this is not, we haven't yet reached our end right now. In terms of, even just look at this conversation that we've had today, it's been useful for me. I hope it's been useful for the audience as well. But for me, as a sort of unprofessional curator. It's been illuminating also to listen to the different perspectives from you, Mami, from Sanjung, from Ruben, and also, I mean, the way in which you all have been largely in agreement about what works, you know. So there's already a legacy of information, and I think it always comes down to something that I say, there has to be handover of information. If information sharing occurs more frequently, then the generation of information is perhaps not the only thing we need to concentrate on. Because the information is there, it already exists. It's just that we have to improve on the way in which people can access it.
Yeah. Ruben, any final thoughts?
I mean, that generational thing is really important. I think, thank you, Shubigi, for your observation. You're absolutely right. I think it's the responsibility of those of us who already have networks to actually facilitate that contact for the next generation. Absolutely. You know, by the same token, I didn't start out as a kind of internationally networked person at all. I was very, very local until, you know, for you know, the first decade of my practice before I was able to find access to funding to be able to travel and make these networks. You know, bearing in mind that this kind of low-cost travel that we've experienced over the last decade is a fairly new thing. But yeah, I think ensuring that that all practices are represented in this future, as Shubigi suggests, is really, really important. That various generations, that we're not just looking at, you know, a star system or the established, but you know, in places with practices that have something extraordinary to say that hasn't been seen for, you know, a very, very long time, is important. And yeah, the virtual is evolving. It'll continue to evolve. I think it's going to be a part of our life, you know, for a very long time. I hope to our benefit. And if it's not, then I think we need to work together to find a better alternative.
I also think that now we can do a lot of local research for the future exchange of the information, that if Ruben can travel within Australia, then you can explore more within your reach. Then I do Japanese parts, then we can exchange in the future.
Of course.
But you have to come back for your favorite ramen.
Definitely.
But thank you very much for your insights and the wonderful conversations. And I seriously hope that we can meet in person before long. But in the meantime, yeah, I think we can continue discussing and finding future sustainable models. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sonjun, Shubigi, and Ruben.
Thank you, Mom.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
皆様ありがとうございました。本日の同時通訳は安保直子さん、板谷悦さんでした。どうもありがとうございました。Thank you very much for the translators.
Thank you.